Hi, and welcome to the next of our sessions from the Grow Your SME program. Today we'll be talking about restructuring your business and going through what you need to do in terms of the current situation, how that might affect things, and whether you might be looking at restructuring your business at this current time. I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. We've got Steve Page from Page Consulting and Jill Batterby from Humber HR. They'll be taking you through the various stages of restructuring your business. First of all, I just want to talk about questions. There is a question section on your little control panel, so you should see the little section saying questions. We are encouraging as many questions as we can. Well, that's what we're here for, to try and help as many people as we can to answer those questions you've got. So please, as the presentation goes on, do put your questions in the question section and we'll come to them at the end. I do suggest if you put them in as you think about them, it just means we can go through those when we come to the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I will pass you on to Steve, who will be taking you through the first part of today's presentation. So Steve, over to yourself.
Fine, thank you very much, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, Restructuring Your Business. Myself and Jill will be walking you through the process of restructuring today. I'm going to be concentrating more on some of those key stages, and Jill will be looking at the people dimension, where we're trying to sort of make sure that the people that may be affected by a restructure are involved, engaged and well communicated, so that the restructuring process can go as smoothly as possible. So without further ado, let's just have a little sort of a walk through. As a bit of background, my sort of experience has been quite varied. I spent a number of years, 20+ years in the aerospace industry, where I sort of worked my way up through the ranks and have been involved in multiple restructuring programs in aerospace, but also in businesses that are within the region. I left the company in 2000 to set up my own business training and consultancy company, and have been working with well over 1,000 businesses, covering a whole range of business development, business support projects. So the sort of experience that I bring today comes from that background. Let me just pass over to Jill, who will give you a little bit of an insight into her background, and then we'll have a little look at the agenda that we'll be covering today.
Hi there.
Jill?
Thank you, Steve. So I'm Associate HR Consultant for Humber HR People. So my background is I studied a Master's in HRM and went on to work in lots of businesses over the last 20 odd years, both corporate and small to medium-sized businesses in lots of different industries. So I bring a really diverse range of experience, I suppose, from lots of different perspectives to the table. I am quite passionate about what I do, and I approach things with whilst we work in a legal framework in HR, with a very people-centered approach. So I do like to put people at the heart of what we're doing, and I will talk about a little bit more about that as we get into the presentation. So looking forward to talking to you all a bit later on.
Fine, thanks, Jill. So so there you have it, a little bit of background in terms of Jill and myself, in terms of what we bring to bear, and we can bring our experiences to help you in the question and answering session at the end of the webinar. So what have we got in today's webinar? Well, I'm going to take a little bit of time just to set the scene in the introduction. But really our focus is on some of the key steps that are involved in undertaking a comprehensive and thorough restructuring exercise of a business. So we're going to be having a little look at what's involved in that incredibly important but first step, where we step back from the business and fundamentally have a little look at our situation so that we understand it as well as we possibly can. Too often, restructuring projects don't do this well enough and go off half-cocked and don't get the results out from things that they should and could have done, because they haven't really had a clear enough understanding of the situation that they were in. So we'll take a bit of time out to have a little look at that, so that you, in your restructuring thoughts and plans, can understand just how thorough you need to be. Because if we don't get that bit right, chances of getting the results out that we want to get reduced. Having understood our situation, then what we need to do is face the brutal truth that comes from that, dust ourselves down and start considering some of the options that we may have available in terms of the change that we want to introduce. Business restructuring is fundamentally a radical business change project, and therefore we need to understand what changes we need to make, the order we need to make them in, and how quickly we need to make them. So we'll have a little look at that. Having sorted out what it is that we need to do in response to the situation that we found ourselves in, then we need to be implementing key changes very effectively. I'll touch on some of those, and particularly the use of a project managed approach. And then Jill will speak about the impact that restructuring can have on the workforce and people individually, particularly in the context of the coronavirus situation that we have now, so that you can guide your projects successfully, engaging with your people and bringing them through the process in the best way that you possibly can. And we'll pick up any questions and answers at the end. Peter will be picking those up in the meantime. So please, as you have questions arising, hit your question button and feed them through to Peter, and we'll pick them up at the end. A 2-hour webinar, quite a lot of time to concentrate. So what we'll do is we'll take a very short 5-minute interlude around about 3 o'clock time, where it gives you the opportunity to refresh your coffee and tea, clear your mind, and come back to pick up the information and guidance that we provide in the second part of the webinar. So that's what we've got scheduled. Let's have a little look at just sort of what we mean when we're talking about restructuring a business. Now, there's some sort of fundamentals here. Restructuring a business isn't something that happens particularly frequently. It's often a business development technique of last resort, and is often introduced when a business finds itself in some sort of financial distress, and there are some major changes that are required in order to be able to recover it. So the levels of experience in terms of business owners and managers tend to be less with this technique than they often are with some of the other business development and business growth techniques, which are commonly used. And for that reason, we find there is some difficulty and a temptation, often because of the time pressures, to cut corners, which can ultimately put the business at risk of not achieving the sort of recovery that it might need to if it's going to survive in the short term and then grow and thrive from the steps that have been taken now. So fundamentally, restructuring is a change management technique, albeit it tends to be often invoking quite a lot of complex changes that need to be done in a structured and ordered way. So change management and change management skills are key to this, and the realization that we're often looking at some of the most difficult challenges that businesses face that would invoke the need for a restructuring program to be introduced. Now, given that complexity, given the time that it takes, given the lack of familiarity that business owners and managers may have in terms of undertaking comprehensive business restructuring programs, then we urge that really now is the time to start to prepare to reopen your business, particularly in the context of COVID-19, because there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done to put you in a position where you're going to be able to adapt your business so that it can find its feet, survive, and then develop on from there as the COVID-19 restrictions start to be eased. So, restructuring put into context, not something that you need to go into lightly, but the nature of the COVID outbreak and the restrictions that are in place is such that business restructuring is quite an essential technique that will need to be used by a lot of businesses as they start to re-engage with the marketplace again. Unprecedented times require some quite severe solutions. So what do we mean when we talk about restructuring per se? The definition of restructuring, and there are quite a number, but fairly good one, is that restructuring is a corporate management term that's really defining the act of reorganizing a number of aspects of the business, which include the legal situation, ownership, as well as sort of operational, organizational, and a range of other structures that might exist in a company, primarily for the purpose of getting it out of financial distress and into a position where it's more profitable, or so that it's better organized to meet the challenges that it might face. So I think COVID is providing two of those situations. A, the potential for financial distress, and B, the market has been so disrupted that some sort of reorganizing and restructuring is likely to be needed, particularly in the early days of easing restrictions, when markets are going to be very delicate and not fully functional, and therefore there might not be the sales opportunities that they were beforehand that are available, and therefore with lower income coming in, the business may need to operate on a lower cost base in order for it to continue to be commercially viable. So that's what we're talking about when we use the term restructuring, just to sort of give you a feel for it. Not only that, but everybody sort of has their own interpretation. So at least you'll understand what I mean by it when I'm talking. So what are the reasons for restructuring a business? Well, there are quite a number of them. So if we just put the COVID situation to one side and look at the sort of more typical reasons why a business might need to restructure, then that will give you that little bit more of an insight and deeper understanding as to when and where the technique is used. So some key examples. Companies will restructure for a variety of reasons. Primarily it's to reduce cost. It's to get out of a financial distressed situation. But it's not only that. It may very well be that markets have changed and adjusted, and as a result of that, certain products and services that the business might have been successfully selling start to fall into decline and are superseded by other changes in the marketplace. And therefore, there may need to be a refocusing on either modifying and bringing those products and services back in line with the changes to the marketplace, or concentrating on those products and services which are still valid and with the customer accounts where that is the case. So that might need some restructuring in the business in order to be able to adapt to those sorts of changing situations. To incorporate new technology. Now there's a whole variety of opportunities for new technology to be introduced, not just sort of bringing internet and websites and a variety of other things through that way, but there may be opportunities to radically replace products with complete new technologies. So just as an example, I can give you an example back from my aerospace days when I was chief engineer of the training systems and equipment business, where the training equipment had real aircraft equipment embedded into it in order for it to work, which was expensive, was late, and had a whole host of other issues associated with it, cooling systems and the likes. Really, it was quite unsuitable for classroom-based training equipment. But the trend had been that way. Customers wanted the same equipment that was in the aircraft, in the training equipment. We introduced a series of low-cost PC-based computer systems that undertook the same performance as the real aircraft equipment for a fraction of the cost. Really cheap and cheerful. But they did a fantastic job. We were able to get them out to the schools early, and the cost absolutely collapsed. And we took a business that was turning over about £2.5 million, which was producing training equipment for the Hawk aircraft, and we extended that to all of the aircraft in the whole of the military aircraft division, some 13 different aircraft types, to build a business that was turning over in excess of £100 million within a 5-year period. The scale up was phenomenal. So the opportunity to replace technology in a business with something which is more effective, cheaper, and easier to use can have some phenomenal opportunities. But the restructuring that is required in order to be able to meet the new demands that the customers then place on you can be incredibly high too. So at a time when the world's being turned upside down, there are more likely to be some great opportunities for introducing new types of technology in order to be able to provide products and services that have beneficial characteristics associated with them. To make better use of talent, particularly where there might be new skills or new ideas coming in that you're wanting to translate to give you a competitive advantage. So that might mean reorganizing aspects of the way departments are set up, or even new job roles that reflect the new skills and talents that are coming through into the business to improve competitive advantage. Also, where there might be new innovations or inventions that the business has come up with, trying to operate those and sell them within the other stuff that you do isn't necessarily going to be the best way forward. But to spin them out into a new company in its own right that enables those new businesses to sell the products that have spun out from research and development opportunities. It may very well be that breaking into a new but quite densely populated market sector is something that you've tried to do but haven't been able to quite manage it. So merging with an organisation that is currently well positioned within there might give you access to markets that otherwise you might have been unable to gain access to. Or again, back around to this sort of financial distress side of things, where the business may have built up a large debt and is seeking to reorganize that debt in a way that makes the business commercially viable in these sort of changing times. So restructuring as a technique is used to undertake a whole variety of different business development opportunities, and therefore isn't something that we're just looking at as a new technique to help us deal with the situation that the COVID outbreak has created. So well established, a lot of experience around in terms of effective restructuring, and there are lots of situations and reasons why you might want to consider it. In our case, primarily we're looking at the massively disrupted market, the delicate sales opportunities that might exist, the fragmentation of the supply chain that we're in that some suppliers may be operating, others may not. And those that are might be restricted capacity because of the social distancing and other factors that they are trying to adapt to as part of them getting up and running. So quite a difficult and uncertain market situation where some radical adaptation measures may very well be appropriate in order for you to emerge back into the marketplace as you start to trade again. Or if you have been continuing to trade, how you might need to adapt further in order to be able to take better advantage of the opportunities that you can see available to you. So I hope that just gives a little bit of a flavour for what restructuring is and some of the reasons why it might need to be undertaken and why it's so appropriate given the severity of the COVID outbreak. So what's involved in it? If we are looking at it as a technique that COVID-19 it will be suitable for, what's going to be involved when we undertake a restructuring project? So restructuring is an action taken by a company to significantly modify. Significantly modify is sort of key to this. The financial and operational aspects of the company, usually when a business is facing financial pressures or distress. So a company typically restructures its operations or its organization by cutting costs, such as payroll, or reducing its size by selling off assets. Payroll is something that is often looked at early on because a business may very well have a surplus of people that it needs in order to meet the amount of sales that might be around, and they can be a significant proportion of the cost base of the business. So therefore included on that list of things to check through for that reason. So if we're looking at the impact that the coronavirus could have had on our business, then that is sort of typified by the little graph that I've just popped up on the slide there, where the green line represents sales and the red dotted line represents expenditure. So it's green for money coming in, red for money going out. And we may, and what I've shown in this example is a business growing rapidly. We can see the sales really taking off. And they have managed to keep the costs under control. So there is a healthy margin, a healthy profit, which is the difference between the money coming in and the money going in. COVID kicked in late March, and for many businesses, they saw sales drop like a stone, go off the edge of a cliff, and have the profile that I've shown in the little graph. But what they also will have experienced is significant difficulty in being able to reduce the cost base anywhere near as quickly as the sales has gone down. Now, COVID therefore is likely to create a situation where we have a negative margin, a loss rather than a profit, where there is more money going out than there is money coming in. And with measures like furloughing and some of the other grant support, and in the case of self-employment, the sort of self-employment grant assistance schemes, then that shortfall has been picked up by the government to some extent. However, those schemes won't last forever. There's a timetable over which they're due to expire, and we need to be getting the business in a situation where we've got that cost base right down, and we've been able to start to push the sales up again, so we get back into a positive margin position rather than a negative one that we might be currently looking at facing when we reopen the business. So, restructuring. We've touched briefly on what it is, what the term stands for. We've identified it as a business development tool, primarily for dealing with more difficult adaptations or developments in a business. And we've touched on a range of reasons as to why it's used, as well as why it could be a very effective tool in terms of helping us to deal with the massive disruptions that the coronavirus restrictions have brought to the UK economy. So what I want to do now is just spend a little bit of time talking about the sort of key steps and stages that you might go through when undertaking a restructuring project. And as I mentioned earlier, it all starts with understanding the situation that you're in quite some detail. So, step one, step back and review your business. Really understand what your situation is, because the better you understand it, the more likely you are to come up with some effective solutions for dealing with it. So, we start off by gathering facts, evidence, key information that we know to be accurate and reliable. So we start off by building our understanding of our financial situation using the latest figures that we have. So information such as cash flow. Now, more businesses fail because they mismanage their cash flow than for any other reason. They simply run out of money and they're unable to continue to trade. So cash flow is key, and understanding the impact that coronavirus has had on cash flow and what the cash flow forecasts might look like moving forward are a really important part of us understanding how we might, what challenges we might have to face financially as we start to reopen our business. Have a little look at information in the trading accounts. What were we doing beforehand and how much of that might we be able to do moving forward, and over what time period do we think things might get back to normal. Really concentrating on things like profit and loss. Not just profit and loss for the business, but profit and loss may be associated with different market segments. So where were we making our money in the past? What were the group of clients or sectors, market sectors that we were involved in that made us the most money? What particular products and services produced what levels of profitability? Because if there were a number of them that we just sort of broke even on, but actually the bulk of the profit was being generated on one or two services or in one sector or 2 or 3 clients, then as we look at moving forward in terms of trying to create a core for our business that is going to be commercially viable and able to survive, then focusing on those things that generate the greatest amount of profit, but have also got the prospects to generate more for the future, are going to be really key pieces of information that you need to have to help you in your decision making moving forward. So understand that market, understand where you made your money, and we're not just looking at sales turnover here, but we're looking at profitability. Some of this information might not be readily available to you in your accounts packages or in terms of the financial analysis that's being undertaken. So you may need to go back to your accountant or your bookkeeper and work with them to help you to tease out the sort of more detailed information that they're going to be much more skilled and able to be able to deliver for. So part of this understanding the financial situation isn't necessarily you trying to put together some little spreadsheets to understand it, although if you've got that capability, strongly encourage you to do so. But to work with other financial professionals that you may already have a relationship with, who can help you to tease out some of the details to the key questions you should be asking. Other information in terms of balance sheet, so you may have a whole series of assets that are tying money up in the business, some of which may be very well utilized and are contributing to the profit generation. Others may be just sat there, not really earning their keep. And if we're looking at trying to claw back money, if we're looking at trying to utilize the assets that we've got that give us the greatest sort of bang for our buck, then there may very well be an opportunity to sell off assets which are not likely to help the business in the short term, providing we're not selling off the sort of king's jewels that or queen's jewels that we're going to need again in the future. So again, think carefully about where there might be an opportunity to bring some money back in, or free money up that's tied up in assets that aren't really being used particularly. And again, looking at fixed asset schedule will give you an indication as to what those assets are, what they might currently be worth, and you can start to draw your own conclusions up from them. Looking at the debt in the business, how much debt does the business have, how is it structured, what sort of payment periods does it have to be paid over, and other opportunities for that to be consolidated, brought into one single loan account and then amortized, spread over a much longer period of time, so that the loan repayments can be reduced as part of a refinancing that you might consider wanting to do. Again, we mentioned employee costs, payroll costs as being often a significant proportion of the cost base of the business. A chunk of those are going to be picked up, I think 80% of them, by the furlough scheme currently, but that's not going to last forever. So as it phases out during sort of September and October, and employers are asked to make a bigger contribution to the payroll costs, how will that work through? And in the meantime, will you have been able to have generated sufficient sales to be able to pick that up and make it commercially viable? Looking at your debtors and creditors list, your debtors are the people that owe you money, they're your customers, and your creditors are your suppliers, they're the people that you owe money to. What is that situation? Are you owed more in than you owe out, or is it vice versa? You know, where is your money in the business, and what sort of commitments are you looking at in terms of having to pay suppliers for the services and goods that you've had from them, and when might you be able to receive some of the money in that customers owe to you, particularly in the lockdown when some of them may very well have become dormant for a while. And what other financial information might you have? So taking the time out to understand where your money is, how it's tied up, what sort of cash flow exists, and get a feel for the sort of financial distress or otherwise the business might be in, because understanding that well gives you a better understanding for how to deal with it, and work with your financial professionals in order to help you to get that information so it can be understood, it can be accurate, and it provides you with a really good insight to what the business situation is from a financial perspective. So, some work to be done there. It takes time. This is why we say you need to be cracking on with a restructuring project, or at least the front end of it, as soon as you get the opportunity to do so. But it's not just the financial side of things that we're looking at. There are other aspects that we need to consider too when we're looking at the business situation. So what we need to do in addition is start to gather some information, and a lot of businesses already generate this, so it's not like we should be starting from scratch, unless you're one of those businesses that shoves all of the paperwork in a black plastic bin liner and once a year trundles off to your accountant and ask them to put your financial figures together for you, and sort of 6-7 months later you've got a picture for how the business performed a year and a half ago. We're looking at really having the latest information available to us, and if you're a business that's already capturing information and reviewing it regularly, then you're going to be in a much stronger position than you might have been otherwise. If not, then there's a need to start thinking about how you go about collecting that information and starting to make it work for you. So what sort of information are we talking about? Well, we're looking at gathering key performance indicator information, so KPIs, and other non-financial business performance information that might be relevant to your situation. So as an example, you can see some of the sort of types of information that we might be looking at. This is just a random selection of sort of more common data that is often very useful when restructuring. So we'd be looking at information in relation to the marketplace, where the money's coming in, as we touched on before. Customer sales accounts, what are customers buying from you in terms of products and services? Is there some seasonality associated with that? Are you one of these businesses, a bit like sort of agriculture, where all of your money is made in one particular season of the year, or like tourism during the summer months, where the vast majority of the income comes in 4 or 5 months of the year. So and then you have to sort of live off the rest in the meantime. So what does that profile look like? And are there any particular things that are selling better than others? What situation are your customers in, and also your suppliers, so that you can understand that supply chain and how you might be affected by that. Some customers may be up and running and demanding products and services from you. For example, if you've got customers that are in the food industry, then they've had a real boom time of this. The panic buying that occurred required them to rapidly increase their production. The restructuring that's been going on in that sector hasn't been one of downsizing, it's been one of upsizing, because they've had 40, 50% increases in demand that they've been having to accommodate for in terms of their food production. I was watching a program on the telly the other day about the Heinz beans factory in the UK, and how that had seen a 50% increase in the demand for baked beans, and some of the restructuring measures that they had been putting in place in their factory in order to be able to accommodate that, in terms of putting on a series of shifts, so that the factory went to a 24/7 operation, in terms of the changes that they'd made to the supply of the beans, which they'd buy in from the States. So instead of having 2 ships worth of beans coming in a day, they're taking it up to 3. In terms of some of the changes that they've been making to some of their less high volume products, so the spaghettis and some of the other products that they had stopped production, and they moved the lines over to bean production. It was an amazing story of success in terms of the restructuring that they had put in place quite successfully and at relatively short notice, in order to be able to accommodate that. They've then got, as the demand starts to die away again in the future, and the demand for some of their other products comes online, going to have to sort of restructure again in order to be able to find the capacity to put some of their other products in. So it might be that some of the lines that got swapped over get moved back, and they might ease back from their 24/7 operation. But some amazing challenges that they've been able to cope with. And they did that from a very, very clear and good understanding of the situation they were in, and the things that they needed to do in order to adapt to it. So looking at that customer-supplier relationship, the situations that both ends of the business are in, and how you would work with them to deal with change, how buoyant a particular market was or not, looking at their sort of asset utilization, so lines that were being used for relatively low demand products were now being reassigned to the high demand products. They were looking at monies tied up in stock, the turnover rates of the stock, so that they could concentrate on the things that had the greatest demand and made them the largest amount of money. Looking at if your business is in manufacturing, a whole series of manufacturing performance measures around throughput rates, factory efficiencies, effectiveness of the processes, overall equipment effectiveness. There's a whole range of measures that can come into play that can give you a really, really good insight as to what of the situation, the non-financial situation your business is in, and how you might want to adapt it to meet the new circumstances that you're finding as a result of whatever it is that's been disrupting the market. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight to sort of financial and non-financial data that you could access. A lot of it you may find is sat in computer systems, never being used, and it's a matter of just going in and finding it and starting to extract it and make better use of it. The other area, as we mentioned before, which is often a significant area, and is one where capacity can change up and down quite considerably. So in the case of, say, the Heinz factory, where they had to go and put additional shifts on, restructure those to get the 27 operation. There were recruitment, training, and a whole series of other things that needed to come in play so that they were able to upsize and upskill in order to meet the particular demands. In the case of COVID, where what we might see is a shrunk market that is incredibly delicate and is going to be a little bit patchy in terms of which bits are coming back on stream and which bits are not, may very well create a situation where you have more human resource capacity than you might need in the short term, not necessarily the longer term, but in the shorter term. And it's how might you understand the capacity that you need and deal with the costs associated with the workforce and employees that you might have. So sort of looking at the key costs, such as payroll, there might be some performance or other bonus payments and rewards that come out. There's all of the pay as you earn, national insurance contributions, pension contributions. Some businesses have healthcare insurance premiums that they're having to pay, other insurances, professional indemnity, public liability. Again, businesses may very well incur travel and accommodation costs associated with people moving around from meeting to meeting, particularly on the sales team side of things. There may be recruitment and training costs, management expenses. You know, the list goes on and on and on of costs that you're incurring as a result of the size of the workforce that you have. And if there's insufficient money coming in to be able to pay for all of those, then how much might you need to cut it back? And what sort of options and considerations might you be looking at? Are you looking at redundancies on one part, although that's usually the technique of last resort? Are you looking at introducing job sharing, part-time work, review of salaries? There's a whole raft of different options that you might want to consider. And there's some consultation that you may also have to engage in, both from a legal, but also from a best business practice point of view, that helps you to better understand this particular significant element of cost within your business. Jill will be talking more about this later on, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, where she'll be looking at the sort of human and well-being impact, as well as some of the legislative and statutory aspects associated with the workforce in the context of structural change to a business. So we need to pull all of that information together, and we need to start to analyze the information so that we can understand what our situation is and what sort of options might be available to us. It can often be a very difficult and hard time. Restructuring often requires hard choices to have to be made. Choices that you wouldn't want to have to make unless you were in a situation that you're in and that if they're not made quickly, it'll only get harder. So you need to face the brutal truth and understand the situation, because only when you do that are you then in a position to start to say, so what am I going to do about it? So fundamentally, the analysis or the question that you're needing to be asking yourself as you evaluate the data that you've been collecting is, what do I need to do to return back to profit as quickly as I possibly can? And what are those other risks that I might be facing if I don't respond to this quickly? Now, not every business is able to recover from the financial distress that it might be in, particularly those that might have been in markets that were in decline before, that have got products and services which were sort of in the last legs of their viable commercial life. When you get a big disruption in the marketplace, this might be the time to say enough's enough, let me move on to something different. I'm not looking at it from that point of view, but there are these other considerations that we need to keep in mind. So if the worst comes to the worst, then there are other things that you might need to keep in mind. The bulk of this webinar is focusing on what you can do in a positive way in order to survive. But if the analysis comes out that is overwhelmingly saying survival isn't going to be a viable option here, then you might need to just cast your mind down other approaches. One example might be merger. There might be aspects of your business, skills, competencies, customers, assets, or other key valuables that may very well have some merit to another company, who may seek to want to acquire your business or may want to merge with you. So don't just trash the business because you feel as though the financial pressure is too much. There may very well be an opportunity to recover some significant value back from it, albeit that it becomes part of another organisation. If things are dire, you're utterly insolvent, you can't see a way forward, the debt's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, you're likely not to be able to pay off your creditors, then there are mechanisms by which you can draw a line under things and go through insolvency processes. So liquidate the business, call in an administrator, or even go through a voluntary administration process yourselves, where you are seeking to come to an agreement with your creditors in a way that you can close the business down more succinctly and effectively without running up significant costs. Again, these are areas that require professional legal advice. So you need to seek that advice as part of pursuing any of these particular options. Or, you know, if worst comes to the worst, you don't owe anybody any money. It's time to sort of say, right, I'm just going to shut it down, take the values and assets that have come from it and look to do something different in the future. So there is a wide spread of options. Restructuring is really a technique that we apply where we believe there's an opportunity to turn a business around and get it back into a survival situation that then enables us to build and develop and grow it again in the future. So, with that in mind, focusing back on that restructuring, what we're really wanting to do now is explore possible trading scenarios that will help us to identify a number of things. What income might be achieved in the short to medium term? Because if you've got an estimate of what you might be able to bring in financially, you can cut your cloth according to that. And therefore it gives you an understanding as to the cost base that you need to have available to you so that you can make money out of the income that you're able to achieve. So what money might come in? What other monies might there be around to help you bridge the gap, certainly in the short term? So what support might be available in grants or other forms of business support? And what other finance might be available in terms of loans, investment, bounce back grants and about bounce back loans and other sort of financial grants and schemes, so that you can understand from a cash flow point of view what amounts of money might be coming in from what sources, that then give you an understanding as to how you might be able to operate moving forward, which particular parts of the business you might need to deploy and gain cost or expense against, that starts to get the business bit by bit back on its feet. So the situation that you may have experienced might look something like this, which is the chart that we looked at a little earlier, where green represents money coming in through sales, and the red dotted line is looking at expenditure. And I think what you really need to realise is what comes next is primarily going to be down to you. Are you going to be in a position where you can pull the costs down quickly enough in the business to enable it to build up its sales in a way that you can then start to grow the business again in the future and bring that expenditure back on as you recover and rebuild? Because that's the scenario that we're really aiming to try to achieve, and that's the situation that we're looking at trying to create in terms of considering the options that we're wanting to consider for the future. So that brings us nicely round to 3 o'clock. We said we'd just have a pause for thought, give you a chance to recharge your mugs, and come back for the second part of the webinar, refreshed. So what I'm going to do is just have a literally 5-minute pause. It's just coming up to 3 o'clock. I will reconvene again in 5 minutes, 3:05, where we'll then consider the options that have come from the review of the business that you've undertaken and those considerations that we've just been talking about. So look forward to picking things up with you then again in a few moments. Until then, enjoy a cuppa. Welcome back to the second part of the webinar. So if you've got your coffees recharged or cups of tea recharged, I will pick up from where we left off and carry on. So the situation that we were looking at was stepping back, fundamentally reviewing your business and gaining as clear an understanding as you possibly could about the situation that the business was in, looking at financial information and data to help you to do that, looking at non-financial information, key performance indicators and other performance measures, as well as specific detailed costs that might be relevant to the situation, touching on employee costs or payroll. As one example, there may very well be other aspects of your business that again attract some detailed costs, the likes of which are really key to understand. Bringing that all together and formulating an understanding that enables you now to start to consider your situation, consider the options in terms of how you might restructure, what you need to restructure, and in what sort of order you might consider doing that. We talked about seeing if we could initially try to gain an understanding of the sort of income that might be available to you, so that we could then start to look at the amount of cost the business could legitimately and commercially be able to incur in order to receive that income or generate that income. And that would then condition how radical and in what way you might want to restructure the business. Don't forget, we're not trying to downsize to something which, as we come out of COVID further, and the markets start to re-establish themselves and bounce back, leaves us in a position where we're unable to meet those increased demands that come back at us. So we have a consideration in the choices that we have as to which option we go for that might give us that better opportunity. So once you've got an idea of what your situation is and the sort of sales or income that you might be able to achieve and how you can achieve them, what you can then start to do is explore ideas for how you're going to reduce the costs, but without undermining your ability to meet your sales. Explore areas of poor performance or weaknesses in your business that are letting you down and you need to do something about. And explore alternative business models or organizational structures that better fit the needs of the business. So if we have a little look at each of these in turn, so exploring ideas for reducing cost, then sort of things that you might consider here are things like defining the minimum resources that you need to win and produce and deliver those sales commitments. So if you're looking at part of the business operating which is aligned to where you believe the market is more buoyant, there's some profitability associated in that area of the market, then what are those specific resources that you might need to bring to bear in order for that part of the business to be able to come online? There's a sort of considerations that we're looking at you follow. Calculate the direct cost of sales and the overheads for running the business. So again, are there parts of the business that you only need to have running in order to keep the costs down, in addition to the actual sort of costs of buying the goods, adding value to them and then selling them on? So you need to look at costs in a fully rounded way, sort of direct as well as the indirect or overhead costs. That will give you that complete financial picture. And also start to develop ideas and strategies whereby you can make that commercially viable. So your first pass might mean that actually you're identifying costs which are way excess of what sort of income might be generated. And if you haven't got any means of short-term buffering for those, then that might mean that it's not going to be commercially viable for you to do it. So have to keep coming back and revisiting just how you can come up with ideas that get that cost base below the amount that you will be able to generate. So quite a number of iterations are often required here in order for you to really sort of get that thought out. Trying to do it on your own is often very difficult. So you're looking at really a small team, often the business leadership team, that would come together in order to be able to kick around some of these ideas. They've most probably been involved in the business review as well and have been collecting information, so should be in a strong position to be able to start to come out with some good ideas in terms of how you might be able to move forward. If we have a look at another area that we could make contributions to getting the business better shipshape, which is a sort of exploring where there might be poor performance or weaknesses that could be improved. When you're busy, the money's coming in, often it's easier just to leave them alone and not do anything with them. But at times of crisis, when every little counts, then you can't really afford that luxury of turning a blind eye and need to get stuck in and deal with them effectively. So sort of examine the financial and business data to identify where change might be needed. So you may already have got some good indication in terms of profit per particular product item or service, or in terms of where some of the higher costs might reside in terms of the operations that you have, give you a clue as to where to look more closely. What you can do is deploy techniques like process mapping and critiquing, so you can define the processes that you're currently using and then streamline them down into just those value-added components that give you a much, much faster, higher quality, lower cost means of being able to do what it is that you're wanting to achieve. Phenomenally powerful techniques. Or you can define ideas to significantly improve performance that give you the commercial viability, which might be the introduction of new technologies or new techniques or different software that enable you to be able to enhance the performance of your operations significantly. Again, when you've been busy and you're making good money, often the things that get left to one side, now's the time to pick up those initiatives and really deal with them. Explore alternative business models and organizational structures. So a business model might very well be, let's take the case of a gym. The business model for gyms has been invest significantly in a well-equipped building, have annual subscriptions, paid monthly, and bring people in to use the equipment to exercise on. The gyms were closed on the 23rd of March and remain closed for the foreseeable future. So that business model is no longer viable in this time. So changing the business model might be to move the whole thing online. So develop exercises which could be done in the home using equipment in the home that enables that continuation of service to be provided. The organisational structures are the job roles that people performed in the departments and teams that they were in. How suitable is that structure now for what might be a completely new business model? And is there overcapacity, and do we need to streamline it, reshuffle it, and shape it accordingly? So, research or identify alternative business models in the way I've just explained that give you a potential to survive. Now, those gyms that have successfully moved online, and I've been working with a number of them recently, are starting to see a steady growth in terms of the number of subscribers, because the physical building model restricted the numbers of people who were prepared to come based on travelling distance and travelling time. Now they're online, the globe potentially is the size of the population that they can attract. So they're starting to attract by word of mouth and social media and a variety of other advertising campaigns, individuals from much further afield, and are starting to build their businesses up in a way that really the previous business model never allowed them to do. So what was a dire situation for them in March is suddenly now looking to be able to provide them with growth prospects that they never ever thought possible before. So it's not all doom and gloom. For those that saw the opportunity and acted quickly, they've done very, very well out of it. Examine opportunities to reposition or pivot the company. Now, where you pivot, you are looking at a different customer group for what you are wanting to sell. So an example of a pivot, I saw on the telly the other day a successful pivot that had taken place. It was a small farmstead. They did cattle and beef, and the farmer was suffering from some sort of lung disease from the dust off the straw from the cattle, and his daughter had come to join the business, and so they were cutting back on beef production and were looking to try to fill the gap. And she'd gone out and bought 2,500 chickens that she'd set free range and was starting to build that side of the business up. And has been very successful in selling into the hospitality sector in terms of cafes and small bakeries and all of those sorts of things with her eggs. And again, when the hospitality industry was closed, bang, her income absolutely closed down. What she did notice, though, was that the market had changed quite significantly. And it was around the time when there was all of the panic buying in the supermarkets, and you could not get eggs for love nor money. So she put a series of campaigns out in order to try to attract local residents to come and buy the eggs from her rather than going into the supermarket. Restructured the business around that, made a whole series of changes to it. And as a result of that, I think in the space of about 3 months, egg production has now gone up to 12,500 eggs a day, and they're selling all of them. So a change in focus in terms of the customer group as a result of the change in the marketplace is a business pivot. So are there opportunities for you to pivot your business, and what restructuring might you need to do in order to be able to make a success of that? Would be key considerations that you would be making at this time in the process. And define your organisational structures that would then enable your people to have the right roles and responsibilities in the right numbers in order to be able to do this. So an awful lot more chickens to feed. There's some new sheds that have had to come online. There's all of the egg picking, cleaning, sorting, quality checking, packing. There's a major adjustment that's gone on to that business, and hats off to them. They've done a remarkable job. So, people and the people dimension, potentially a significant cost, and also something that is often heavily impacted when a restructure comes along. Because at the end of the day, it's people that do stuff. They're the ones that make the business happen. And if we're restructuring, then that's often got a big impact on job roles and numbers of people and that side of things. So organisational restructuring is often an integral part of a business restructure. So what is it, and what sort of shape does it take? So organisational restructuring is when a company's business model has changed, as we've just talked about, due to internal or external factors, such that the business needs to adapt in order to survive and then regrow. And this might be downsizing, as might be the situation for a lot of those affected by COVID, although not necessarily. We're just talking about the egg-producing farmstead, where they've upsized and reshuffled their staffing requirements. So how does this feature in terms of some of the decisions that you're needing to make? An important consideration as well when restructuring your business is the impact that restructuring can have on employees. And Professor Nielsen said that the characteristics of restructuring or the restructuring process, such as fairness of procedures, communication, change management, all have an impact on worker well-being. Some groups of workers react less negatively, for example, if they have more chance of influencing the process. And therefore, the way we go about restructuring is as important as the restructuring decisions that we make throughout. Joe will talk a little bit more about this in a few moments, but really wanted to bring out this as an important dimension. It's not just the decisions you make, but it's the whole process of how you engage and involve your employees as part of that process, and the communications that you have that are absolutely key to moving it forward successfully. So just a few pointers in terms of summary. The position that you should be now in is that you're able to determine the exact nature and the extent of the problem that you have from the business review. You should be able to list what areas of the business might need to be restructured, and also have a bit of a feel for the type of restructuring that's needed. From that, you should then be able to select the best options that you believe are going to be required moving it forward. And are they driven by a business pivot? Are they driven by a need to have a part of the business up and running and just bring online those resources that are needed at the minimum cost? What's that sort of strategy that you're looking at moving forward? Develop that into a vision, because the clearer you can see it, the better you can communicate it, the more people will buy into it, and the more effective you will be. If you haven't got a clue what on earth you're trying to do, you haven't done your homework, then the chances of you coming up with an effective strategy are going to be pretty close to nil. Don't put yourself in that position. Once your vision's clear, develop an outline plan for how you're going to achieve it. You won't be able to put the details in yet, because we're needing to be involving and engaging others as part of that process, but at least you've got some of the key stepping stones in place that put you into a position where you can start to now look at implementing some of those changes and involving the workforce, your employees and other stakeholders as part of that process. So just moving on at pace, time's drifting by. So what's involved with implementing? One of the big things with restructuring projects is they often take longer to do than you think they're going to, because they are complex and they do involve such a wide variety of different parts of the business. So, you know, when you're looking at restructuring, you're considering customers, suppliers, stockholders, your employees, financial relationships, quality, health and safety, environmental impact. The list just goes on and on and on. And the plans that you come up with need to incorporate and include all of those. And planning is a key technique in preparing properly so that the restructuring goes along the lines that you want it to. And this is where taking a more project managed approach can come into play, because you can organize the various activities that you need to undertake, you can allocate them within certain time zones, and you can start to look at who you want to be involved in what parts of the process in order to be able to bring it together. And really capitalize on all of the thoughts and ideas that you've got and lay them together in a clear and well-defined and detailed set of plans and actions. It will pay dividends in your restructuring project to take the time out to organize what it is that you need to do. Without it, there's often too many things going on. That means that you'll drop the ball on one or two, and that could be a disaster. So, organizational restructuring, focusing in on the people side of things. And Jill's going to pick up now the sort of human dimension to the restructuring side in the context of COVID and all of the sort of schemes and the likes that are currently in place. But before she does, what I just want to do is just touch on these sort of key stages in the planning process that you should consider as part of moving things forward. So appoint your project leadership team. That's already going to have been you for these first stages, but now we're moving into the implementation. That might need to be others getting involved as well. Define and communicate the vision for success. The clearer the vision, the more confidence people have in you, the better you're likely to be supported, and the less resistance you're likely to generate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate why as well as what. The more people understand it, they might not like it, the more they're going to go along with it. Give managers the support and skills that they need to succeed in helping the whole plan work through. Consult and engage with your employees. Shape that future culture in terms of adaptability, flexibility, positive mindedness, and tackle the difficult decisions. And culminate all of that in keeping the right people in the business. So I hope that's given you some insight into the steps and stages that you would undertake in a restructuring program. I'm now going to pass over to Jill to talk you through the organizational HR side of things. And then I'll rejoin Jill in the questions and answer session just before 4 o'clock. So over now to Jill, if I can just get the handover. Okay, Jill.
Okay.
Controls are over with you now, hopefully.
That's great. Thanks, Peter, and thanks for giving us lots of really interesting insights into the restructuring process. It's quite a complex process, and I've learnt a lot this afternoon, Peter. No, Steve, thanks for that. Thanks very much. Keep calling you the wrong name.
I'll see you shortly.
Okay, so if I just really wanted to kick off with starting with the, is it not moving? Hang on. Sorry, Steve, I don't seem to have control. Sorry about the delay, folks. Just trying to get the slides running. Ah, here we go. So just wanted to check in really on the furlough scheme, just because it is quite critical. It's at a critical point at the moment in terms of today actually is the last day that you can put somebody onto the furlough scheme for the first time, because at the end of this month it actually closes, and therefore you need 3 weeks to have somebody on the scheme. So today is the day, so it's quite a critical point. Plus, the furlough scheme obviously was designed by the government to prevent redundancies, which we hope that lots of employers can do, but unfortunately we are seeing mass redundancies across the board at the moment. You know, in the larger businesses announcing some, you know, quite substantial numbers. With that in mind, collective consultation has long periods of time that you need to adhere to, you know, up to 45 days for over 100 people. So therefore, you need to be planning very carefully, moving towards the end of October when the furlough scheme will close. So these are the pivotal dates, I guess, dates to just keep in mind as you go through the next 2 or 3 months. The scheme becomes flexible furlough in July, where you can bring people back to work on a part-time basis if you need to. August, employers will start to pay national insurance and pension contributions. September, you'll do the same with your national insurance and pension, but the government will drop back to 70%. Therefore, you'll have to top it up with 10%. And then in October, again, national insurance and pension contributions, but the government's contribution is down to 60%. So you will have to top up. So I guess it's just to bear it in mind in your planning stages. Now is the time to start really thinking this through, and I'll go on to more detail around the consultation process and timescales shortly. So kicking off, picking up really on what Steve was saying in relation to really engaging people in the process. I think for me, all the restructures, you know, that I've been involved in, where it really works well is when people do feel involved and they do feel they understand what's happening. You know, it is such an emotive process. If you mention redundancies, you know, that strikes emotion straight away. We're in a very unstable sort of time from a people perspective. It's adding a lot of uncertainty for people because they're already at home, some furloughed, and in touch with the business, but not really in the business, not really knowing what's happening to it, waiting in anticipation for news of whether, you know, they're going to have a job or not, whether the business will survive or not. So unfortunately, it's bringing a lot of anxiety to people, and we're seeing that across the board. They've got things to worry about in terms of finances, childcare at the moment, schools still not fully open. There's lots going on, so it's a very different situation to when we would normally sit and talk about downsizing in a business or, you know, potential redundancies. We've got lots of added elements that you need to carefully consider as you move into any planning around this. And I think ambiguity is the worst thing that can happen. Where it falls down is where people are unclear on what's happening. The rumour mill gets going, and then it turns into something it's absolutely not. So I think where it works really well, and there's a great example of the communication that has come out from Airbnb, which have unfortunately had to make massive redundancies, you know, or is in that process at the moment of restructuring and making redundancies. CEO issued the communication. If you get hold of it, it is like if you put it in online, you can get it. And it's such a heartfelt communication around his passion for the business, his sadness of what's happened with COVID-19, his belief that he had a lot of talent in the business, and he's set up a talent academy to try and get people into other jobs and all sorts of things. But from the core, you know, the core of the message is it's from the heart, and he is so sad with the news. And I think sometimes you show that vulnerability and openness and honesty to people, they can relate to it, and I'm sure people will in your respective businesses understand what's happening here. But it's how you can be visible, supportive, and be open with them throughout. So I think just keeping that in mind as we talk around some of the statutory and legal obligations, it's people are at the heart of this, I guess. So looking at, unfortunately, if we move to a redundancy situation, you know, a genuine redundancy situation exists for mainly these three reasons. Generally, there are other scenarios that could come into it, but this is generally when a redundant situation exists. It's when it has ceased, a business has ceased or intends to cease continuing, when the requirements for employees to perform work of a specific type has ceased or it is expected to do so, and also whether the business is going to shut down a specific workplace or location. So these are the three areas that we often see redundancy situations arising from. And I think when you're looking at everything and you're in that planning process, it's being clear on, you know, does it actually become a genuine redundancy situation, or are there other options that we can consider? So as Steve mentioned, you know, there is a large part of planning and building a case. I guess from a redundancy perspective, the business case for that also needs to be clear. This is for lots of reasons. It helps you sort of, you know, define what you're going to be doing, but also when you move into, if you're in large-scale redundancies, you know, there are obligations to provide lots of information to trade unions, employee reps, and to employees in terms of what is happening, how you're going about it, how you're going to consult, you know, is there any option to avoid redundancies? How you're going to select, which we're going to move on to some of these areas in more detail shortly. You know, how you're structuring the redundancy pay, you know, how it's worked out. There is, again, a framework that sits within. People need to understand that. And also the future piece. So whilst we're in this, you know, time of looking at redundancies and losing employees, it's also, you know, those that are left behind, they have they often struggle again with settling in and need to understand the future and really feel that the future is bright, if you like. So it's pulling all that together. There's lots of different facets just from a people's perspective, as Steve touched on also. And then I think moving back to thinking about alternative scenarios, from a people perspective, there are lots of different ways of for people to work within your business, and we spend, you know, quite a lot of time looking at the various scenarios, trying to understand, you know, is there anything that we can do other than compulsory redundancy? You know, flexible working, there are job sharing, you can reduce hours, compress hours. There are things like layoffs and short-time working. Just on that, you do need to check contracts. There needs to be a clause within that that allows you to lay off or put people on short-time working. But, you know, flexible working, we've seen businesses where overnight they were thrown into people working from home, and we've spent years trying to drive more flexible working approaches. And, you know, whilst there was no preparation and often no technology to back that up, and it wasn't an ideal situation with an overnight thrown into this, but at the end of the day, it's been achieved. And lots of businesses that never thought they could work from home, i.e. banks, you know, people where there's a lot of confidential data that's very sensitive, are working from home, you know, and it has, it's been a massive revelation, I think, flexible working perspective. Whether that continues will remain to be seen, but I think it is about thinking about, you know, let's do this differently. And I think this stage is really important to involve people. This is about gaining buy-in from your employees, really involving them in the conversations, and let them, you know, help you come to a solution on this. You'll need agreement from them anyway to change some of these things, but also they may have some really good ideas that we haven't thought about. So lots of different ways of doing this, and I think it's about really working through every scenario before you hit the point of it has to be a redundancy. One of the things you can offer is suitable alternative employment. So if you're in a larger organisation, there is often opportunity to move into different departments. There is the, you know, as part of the redundancy process, people do get a 4-week trial period, and they can have that on numerous roles. So if there's different roles they can try, they can have a 4-week trial period. But it does often provide a solution and prevent redundancy. And also the other option is we always, you know, ask for all voluntary redundancy. Even if people apply that have the skills that you want to retain in the business, you do not have to accept voluntary redundancy for people, but often you do find people just want, you know, might just want to move on for whatever reason. So it's working through all the scenarios, really being creative in your thinking, and seeing, you know, what might work rather than a redundancy situation. So thinking if you do end up changing, varying any contract, it is important that you gain agreement with any changes or variations to terms and conditions. So express terms are written down, often laid out in your contracts. There might be within a collective agreement or a workforce agreement, or even handbooks can sometimes have express terms in them. Implied terms, which, you know, are not often written down but have become the way we do things, custom and practice, they are important to consider. We get implied terms in that are terms of statute, so the statutory notice period is one of those. It may not be written down in your contracts, but it's something you've got to do if you go through a redundancy process. As it says, you know, that they are all contractually binding and legally enforceable. So whenever you're talking about changes, and in our current climate at the moment, there are a lot of businesses looking at different hours of work, times of work to stagger times, you know, different shifts, different teams working at different times. Thinking of all the scenarios, all of this must be, whether temporary or permanent, must be agreed in writing, and you must follow a procedure, you know, and it's a good thing to get into, and they call it the 3 C's, but it is, you know, communicate, consult, which is very different, that's the 2-way process, and then the confirmation of anything that you might change once you've gained agreement with your employees. So the selection criteria, when we talk about selection, we from a redundancy perspective, we have to identify the pool of people that we are going to potentially make redundant or put at risk of redundancy. The pool is just worth considering. It needs to include everyone that has a similar set of skills, unless a role is unique and absolutely unique, and a finance department is always a good example of this. You can often have a lot of roles that are very similar, whilst they might have different job titles. So it's being very careful in terms of not just selecting one person. If there are a lot of similar roles, you must put them all into the pool to go through a selection process. before making the decision on who is going to be made redundant. So identifying your pool, and then you draw up your selection criteria. We do get asked a lot of questions about selection criteria. It isn't laid out in a procedure in terms of this is what you must do. You have more flexibility when you're thinking about selection criteria that's suitable for your organisation, as long as it's fair and reasonable, and they're the two words we always use. So it is important to think about what you might use. A lot of criteria is based around performance, skills, qualifications, knowledge, absence, and potentially any current disciplinary records. It's best to stay away from, we used to use years ago, lengths of service, last one in, first one out, all of this. That causes major problems from a discrimination perspective. So please, keep it defined criteria that can be measured as much as it can be. Try and stay away from subjective and remain objective with criteria, so you can evidence it. If you think about performance, if you use performance reviews, then you've got some evidence of being able to measure within your organisation. So it's using criteria that's not too subjective. And also the consultation process, it's is about being upfront, honest, transparent, and there's no reason why you shouldn't share selection criteria. A lot of a lot of businesses do, and it is the right thing to do, and it should be shared as part of the consultation process, so people know how they're being selected. They get an opportunity to input to it again. So whilst you might shape it up, leave it as part of the consultation process so it can be agreed after you've gone through the consultation process, and then everybody's aware how people are being selected for redundancy. So the actual process consultation, we are, the guidance from the government at the moment is that consultation must still take place. So the legislation has not changed in any way from a redundancy process or a contract variation process or any employment law changes around this area. So therefore we must still consult. Now that logistically may provide, prove difficult with organisations, or more challenging is probably the word to use. But there is no legal requirement that consultation has to be face-to-face. Therefore, it can be, over whatever form of media you are using, whether that's Teams, whether it's Zoom, whatever that might look like. But you must allow that to happen to ensure that it's a fair process and the whole consultation process is done. So in terms of timescales, large scale, 100 or more redundancies within a 90-day period, you must consult for at least 45 days before any dismissals take effect. And you have an obligation to notify the Redundancy Payment Service on a form called HR1. You can get that from gov.uk. Obviously, generally, with large-scale redundancies, there are trade union representatives involved if you recognise trade union, or if not trade unions, then employee representatives must be involved. Same with 20 to 99, you have an obligation to notify the Redundancy Payment Service, and trade union reps and employee reps should be involved. If you don't have either of those, then you should appoint employee reps with large-scale redundancies so they can support not only the consultation process but also those at risk. For 20 to 99 redundancies, it is a 30-day consultation period before any dismissals take effect. With less than 20 people, you're not required to consult collectively, and there is no real standard procedure laid out. However, whenever we work with redundancy, we would always advise that you follow a fair process, that you use standard practice i.e. 30 days for consultation, because that gives a lot of time for people to come back and talk about it, get their ideas, shape things up. You must consult individually with them, and also a 3-meeting, sort of first meeting, second meeting, third meeting is always a good plan with less than 20 people. You must demonstrate really that you have gone through a fair and reasonable process and given people the chance to be consulted with, understand, and before you reach any decisions. Okay, so in terms of the termination notice, you can only terminate people or give notice of termination once the consultation process is complete. So you have to have gone through the whole process. That's whether that's a collective consultation, then individual, or just individual. You need to be at the end of the whole process before you move on to issuing any notice of termination. It's always best practice to offer people to have a trade union rep or an employee rep with them. You should do it, in terms of the notice meeting, that final meeting, but we would say all the way through, and certainly in large-scale redundancies, trade unions and employee reps would need to be involved. It's support for the individual, and also, there's often 2 people on the management side of it sitting in that meeting. It's nice for them to have somebody there with them who just, is their support through the process. So ensure that opportunity is given to your employees. And key is, you must make them aware of the right to appeal. So even when you get to the end of it, and the decisions are made and they're aware of that, you must ensure that they have that right to appeal, and they're aware of how that works within your organisation. If people are staying within the organisation to work their notice, it will depend on your contracts and whether you have payment in lieu of notice within it. They may still work until the end of that notice, or you may put them on garden leave, or you may have a pay in lieu of notice clause in there, but you need to check your contracts. But if they do stay at work, then they have a reasonable right to paid time off, so they can go and search for work and look for further opportunities in the future. So most employers do offer that and do pay them for doing that. So and also thinking about the people at the centre of this, really going through it. They will be feeling very out of sorts, and some people may not have actually applied for a job in lots of years and find themselves in a situation where they have no idea how to approach that next step to search for a role. It is going to be even more challenging out there at the moment for people to find a role. So any support that you can offer, whether you're large or small, large organisations often have programmes that can assist with this, but smaller organisations, it is just about helping people write CVs, helping them with interview skills. The HR team can help with that. Anyone who's interviews regularly knows how it works. There's lots of different ways of helping people. There are organisations out there, Job Centre Plus, National Careers, it's pointing people in the direction of help and support, just to give them that additional support whilst they're trying to get on their feet and decide what they're going to do next. And then the statutory redundancy pay. Obviously, they need 2 years continuous service or more at the date of termination to receive statutory redundancy pay, as well as any contractual payment. Redundancy pay is, it's calculated on a specific calculation, which is age, length of service, and weekly pay. You can actually access that through gov.uk again, which helps you work out statutory redundancy pays. At the moment is capped at 16,140 from April. You obviously, employees are entitled to notice periods, both statutory and contractual, and they will accrue holiday pay. So you need to be looking at all of that in your planning phase as well, so that you're aware of, you know, what potential costs you're looking at, but also once you get into conversations with people, they are going to be looking for that information, and obviously that's the first thing on their minds when they find themselves in these situations. So being clear on what that looks like for yourselves and for your employees. Some companies offer enhanced redundancy schemes, so on you know, above and beyond the statutory redundancy pay. That would be in the contract. So again, go back to your contracts and make sure you understand what is offered, whether it's just statutory or enhanced. It is tax-free up to £30,000, but there are caps on the number of years that that you can have. So it's 20 years capped, I think, of service. So it's, you know, once you're working all this through, it'll you need to understand all of that so that you know exactly how it's going to map out for you. And also confirm in writing how redundancy pay has been calculated. So part of your planning process will be to look at all of this, make sure it's very clear to all your employees once they're given that information and included in writing, so they're clear on it. And finally, I think we started with, you know, engage and involve your workforce in the whole process, keep them at the centre of this. And the big thing when we go through a process, we often end up at the end of a procedure, which is quite legal framework, and we're working with all of that, and there's lots going on to ensure that we're keeping in line with what we need to do. But the people who do stay and are lucky enough to have, we call them survivors, are lucky enough to have survived, they might be doing new ways of working, they might have a different role, they might feel a bit insecure, they might have lost colleagues that they were working with. As I say, it is quite an emotive process. It will be very much so at the moment, and it's trying to get them back into the thinking of, you know, the future, supporting them through all of the changes, and the managers are key in this, and supporting the managers sometimes come into this as well, because these are quite challenging conversations that managers may have to have. But help them understand, you know, debrief, what have we learned. Inductions into new roles is always is good, you know, because even though they might be around the block for a while, it's making sure that they're comfortable in how it looks now. And I think the future piece is really critical to get them focused on, you know, we look different, we feel different, but we've got a future. We've got a great opportunity to set new goals and expectations for the future. And hopefully, you know, along the way, they've understood what's had to happen, and now want to sort of move forward with the business and make that business a really, really good business for the future. So it's planning that as well when you're in your planning phase, not just the get to the point of, you know, who's been made redundant, but let's look at, you know, the future and how everybody's going to remain engaged, really involved, and want to move the business forward. And that's it from me. So I think we've just about hit our time. So any questions, I guess?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jill and Steve, for a really informative and detailed presentation. on the subject there. We've only got the one sort of question, which is just about slides. In terms of the slides, if you want to access any of those, if you contact the Humber Growth Hub, the web address is just on the slide there, humbergrowthhub.org. They should be able to help you with any slides or anything in terms of that. So I think that just leaves me to thank both Jill and Steve for such informative presentations there. A lot to take away, a lot to think about, a lot going forward there. Do have a look at what other events we've got coming up, and that can be booked onto. Again, if you visit the Humber Growth Hub website, which is humbergrowthhub.org, and then go /event, that should take you to the events page, where you will be able to access any of the workshops that are going forward. We've got ones certainly coming up on returning back to work, what you need to do to be COVID secure. Jill, just a question that's just come in just while we've been talking here. A question regarding redundancy. It says, can staff still be made redundant while furloughed?
Yes, that is yes. Yeah. So it does state that in the government guidance as well. So you know, we've got a lot of people at home at the moment on furlough, and that process will need to start fairly soon if we're going to move into consultation with people. And yes, ultimately, obviously, as we know, the scheme was designed to try and prevent this, but businesses, you know, may not be able to do that, and therefore might have to move into start planning that. So yes, they can start to think about that now. And the
process would be exactly the same, I'm assuming, if they're on furlough to if they were in normal work.
Absolutely. The only thing you've got is logistically it's more challenging because you're not face to face with people, and you've got people at home who you've hopefully you've kept in touch with. But there's quite a lot of logistics to think about in terms of how you can make those meetings happen. But yes, you can start to do that in terms of looking at redundancies. So yeah.
Thank you very much. As I say, if there are any questions, certainly we'll be able to follow up with any questions you've got. And if anybody would like to access any one-to-one support, again, please contact the Growth Hub to make those arrangements. That certainly can be done going forward. So, as I say, thank you very much, Jill. Thank you very much, Steve. We've, I think, come to the end of the sort of the time allotted, but certainly, as I say, very, very interesting and useful. But thank you very much, and hope to see some of you fairly soon.